Israel operated. And there's actually a lot of detailed analysis of how Israel conducted that, which I'm sure that Hamas used to form their current plan. The fact that they made this really sophisticated operation in every way, from the planning, the way they were able to deceive the Israeli intelligence, to blind them to certain things, to deceive them to making other things appear one way when they were different, and then to be able to launch all those air, land, and sea points of incursion, all speak of great deal of planning and preparation, and a really good tactical plan. But then the fact that they, expressly targeted civilians and not just killed people, but they slaughtered them and butchered many of the bodies, designed to create maximum outrage. I think it's reasonable to suggest that their intention was to draw the Israeli Defense Forces into a ground incursion, which is why I believe they probably have spent a lot of time preparing the groundwork there, because nobody knows that the land inside Gaza the way Hamas does. They have no doubt prepared lots of traps. They are going to try to draw the IDF into certain areas where they can make an ambush for them, and they just want to, I think, cause maximum casualties for Israel. As long as the fighting is outside or out in the open, then Hamas has no chance. They can literally just be mowed down. But if they can draw them inside that built-up area, then all of a sudden it neutralizes a lot of the armor. For example, you can't drive a tank when you've rubbled half of the city, because you can't drive around anywhere. You can't go on top of these buildings that have been fallen. And now then, ironically, even though the intent for Israel was to destroy a lot of these tunnels and whatnot, they've actually made things harder for themselves, because just like back in Stalingrad during World War II, when the Russians used the rubbled city to defend against the German attackers, I think that Hamas will probably do the same thing, because there's a lot of places that you can hide in there that now then you can't just go and root them out easily, because only the defenders know where they're hiding. But then you're talking about now the biggest difference between all those previous 5 attacks and this one is that the objective then was to harm Hamas, to weaken their military capacity, or to specifically go after rocket launching sites, etc. Now then, the stated objective is the destruction of the entire Hamas organization. And you're talking 30, maybe 50,000 people, possibly even more by now, because, you got to think that every man inside the Gaza Strip area is a potential convert, because of so many thousands that have now been killed. I mean, they don't have any motivation to stay out of it. Once your family has been killed, that oftentimes I've seen in my own military combat experience draws people onto your opponent, which otherwise they would be happy to stay out of. But now then you're talking so many more people, so you can't just bomb your way out of this one. You're going to have to send people in, and you're going to have to go house to house, building to building, and sometimes floor by floor. And that is, again, you don't get to use all your high-tech stuff with your armor. That's an infantry fight. And then now that makes it an equal fight, because Hamas is also in the same condition. And that means your casualties are going to be really, really high. Now, to the point that your kind of question you were asking just before you brought me on here, was when might Hezbollah, if they're going to attack, when would they do it? I don't think that they would do it as soon as Israel attacks. I certainly wouldn't if I was given if it was my tactical operation. I would wait until Israel goes in and gets bogged down, and after they have suffered a lot of casualties and maybe gotten their units pinned inside and stuck in different areas, and then I might go in when my troops are fresh and theirs are weak. So I doubt that it'll be a quick thing, and I think people may get the wrong idea. If Israel goes in and Hezbollah doesn't attack, they'll say, okay, well they're deterred. They got the message. Well, maybe they did, and who can say except for their leadership. But I will be worried about it if this drags into months-long war. Like even Israel's now saying they think this could be maybe up to 3 months. But most wars have a habit of going places that nobody planned and nobody wanted, and I bet it'd be longer than 3 months. But I think that's kind of where we are right now.
Before you ask your question, Zev, just want to tell David Falt is requesting, he's a hostage negotiator. I'll be bringing you up shortly, David, because I want to discuss with you the hostages released today. Also, I see Faraz, Wajih, Ahmed. I will try to bring you up throughout the space. Go ahead, Zev. I've got a few questions as well for
just a quick question for Daniel. I hear a lot of people on some sides saying, oh, listen, maybe the Israelis won't go in. I am not of that belief, clearly. Where do you stand on that? What is the likelihood of an all-out ground incursion or invasion? I mean, is
You
it
know,
still at 100%?
I mean, nothing's 100% until it actually happens. But I mean, the leadership for Israel has painted itself into a corner. They have, continue to emphatically say it's the destruction of Hamas. They're not going to just be, punished this time. They're going to have to be destroyed, and the only way you can do that is to go in. Now, I would argue if I'm looking at this from the Israeli perspective, I think that they should take a minimum of 3 months. I would isolate all of the Hamas in the northern area, would not play into their strengths, and would let them, just suffer in those ruins there for a long time, and that's going to make them weaker. Meanwhile, the Israelis will be able to do a better job of intelligence preparation of the battlefield. They can do rehearsals and they can do more training, which they desperately need. Because look, they didn't even do much training at all during the summer because of all these chaotic things going on within Israel.
So you agree, just 1 second, though, but you do agree then that this delay, what people are teaming as a delay, is not necessarily a bad thing, correct?
Not for Israel's perspective. I think they need to wait longer.
So I want to, before you jump in, Noga and others, I've got another question for you, Daniel. Just taking it back to the beginning, how involved do you think Iran was in what happened on October 7th? They say they weren't aware. The leader, there were reports, I don't think he said it himself, but there were reports that the leader of Hamas's political wing was not aware. He was on a flight to Iraq and then he had to cancel it last minute after the attacks happened. Hezbollah said they're not aware. We had a Lebanese politician, I think it was the prime minister or the foreign minister, said yesterday that Hezbollah and Iran were not aware. Hamas said Iran was not involved or aware, one or the other, early on in the conflict. Is that Iran distancing itself to avoid facing repercussions because the operation exceeded what anyone's expectations, kind of got out of control? Were they involved, or is it true they're not involved and that was kept to a closed circle within Hamas's military wing?
The fact that you had all of those groups you just mentioned say that it wasn't, the fact that the U.S. said it wasn't, and that even Israel said that they don't have any direct evidence of Iran actively planning and being a part of this, I think tells you a lot that you need to know. That if they did, if Iran was involved, I think there'd be a lot of motivation for people to give that information, because a lot of people are looking for any reason to go to war with Iran anyway in the West. But I think that based on how the Hamas completely fooled the Israeli intelligence services, I think they did the same and kept everybody in the dark, because operational security is absolutely essential in these kind of operations. And given the extraordinary level of success that it had, I think they did keep it from Iran. And plus, I don't think Iran would do that. I don't think Iran would want their fingerprints on something that could result in them being directly attacked, because that's the last thing they want. They don't want a regional war, at least not with them in the crosshairs, because they can't afford that. They can't sustain that. If we go in and attack them, in retaliation for something, they don't have the power to resist that. So I don't think that they did.
I think we've got a question. Craig, go ahead. We're just going to focus a few questions for Daniel, because I've got a bunch of questions as well, but I'm trying not to be greedy.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Mario. And thank you, Ben and Hadi and Mario, again for this space. And Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. I very much appreciate your service. I'm also a vet. So thank you very much for your service to the country.
You bet. Likewise.
I just have a quick question in regards to Hezbollah, because I think that it's one of these things. It's like the balloon in the air, right? It's there. It's a contrast against the background, but at the end of the day, there's just air there, right? It's just hot air. So let me try to synthesize this down. Hezbollah has around, call it 100,000 men under arms, right? I think that's just a good round number to base that off of. However, their ground forces, if you will, are not the most sophisticated, nor are they the most well-armed, nor are they, the best capabilities, right, in terms of their tactics, experience, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't you say that a ground incursion from Hezbollah is much less likely than, say, rocket and missile attacks that can be intercepted using any variation of forms it might have?
I think that I think that Hezbollah is a little more capable than that. At least according to the reports that I've been reading, is that they have the ability, or they have the experience that they've been fighting in Syria. They have been training even Hamas fighters and they've been doing stuff with other jihadi groups. So they actually do have some experience, and they have been upgrading their physical capacity. So I think they have a little bit more than certainly they did in the 2006 war with Israel when they, there. So I think they're a lot more capable now than they were. They're a lot more focused. They also know a lot more about the Israeli Defense Forces, as having watched them in that previous war as well as the ones in Hamas. But they do have that; those are much more capable than what they've had in the past. So I think the threat is pretty real. But I'm just telling you, any time you talk about crossing that line and actually getting into a war, you just lose control over what state power, and they've got all aspects of national power. Hamas doesn't. So if it gets into a slugfest, I don't think that Hamas can stay up with that. So I wouldn't if I was them. But the problem is Hamas shouldn't have done this either, because they don't have the capacity to win, but they did. And we can't rule out that Hamas or that Hezbollah might do something that doesn't make sense to us, but somehow they may do it because they're just fed up. Who knows?
Yeah, war certainly distorts reality. I think Clausewitz taught us that. If I could, Mario, just briefly, I just want to dovetail off that for 2 seconds. If Hamas was to launch a ground invasion in any size, whether that be a brigade, division, and I understand that their force structure is not exactly on the Western standard here, but just given numbers, whether it be brigade or divisional size, I think it would be fair to say that they would be absolutely destroyed by the Israeli Air Force. I mean, if they're out and about roaming around, especially in that kind of constrained terrain, I think that's fair to say that the Israeli Air Force would create a euphemism of the highway of death, as we saw in Iraq. Would that be fair?
Well, except that, at least what's reported, again, I'll have to caveat with that, is that Hezbollah now has a lot more air defense capacity. They have some that they didn't have before. And apparently even Hamas does. And so if Israel starts to go in with, say, for example, attack helicopters, that could come vulnerable. And we've certainly seen what those kinds of weapons can do in the Russia-Ukraine war. And so it may not be a free environment for Israel as it has been in the era up to this point. And we just don't know that. And that's kind of the big problem and the risk, that if Israel starts, going in and they start doing that, and now this, I think for the first time, if they start losing lots of jets or helicopters, that could really undermine the view that Israel is, indefeatable militarily, and could prompt more to try to take them on. And so it's a risk for Israel.
Colonel, I've got 2 questions, or 1 question for you. I'm just going to read out a few updates from today. So we have the Brigadier General of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and he issued a statement declaring that they are prepared to launch a missile strike directly at Haifa if deemed necessary. Now, I know Iran's rhetoric is always along those lines, but just the timing of it. We got the Israeli Minister of Economy said Iran's plan is to attack Israel on all fronts. If we find that they intend to attack Israel, we will not just retaliate on these fronts, but we will also get to the head of the snake, which is Iran. So he's essentially threatening Iran with a direct strike if Iran attacks through its proxies. And then Biden today as well, everything I'm mentioning is just today. Biden expressed worry about the potential for a wider Middle East conflict. We've also got the US officials are apparently, quote, concerned of the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region. Iranian foreign minister said, that one is a couple of days ago, despite Lebanon's economic crisis, that will not prevent Hezbollah from joining the war. So you've just got, you've just got the prime minister. He is communicating with the prime minister of Lebanon. I mentioned earlier is communicating with groups within Lebanon to try to de-escalate the situation. The Pentagon said we are concerned about a broader escalation of attacks against our forces, and it continues. The prime minister, Rishi Sunak, said the same thing. British prime minister. So my question to you is: it seems everyone's concerned about it now. I would assume that with all the behind the scenes discussions they've had, Hoshyar was talking about how Iran visited Qatar, and then right after Blinken visited Qatar, and then Blinken went to Israel. So Qatar is acting as a mediator in this case. So my question is, do they just not know if Iran's going to get involved? Because it doesn't look like anyone knows, or either that, or it's looking inevitable considering the movement of US troops. We were discussing that in depth yesterday. And of course, the concerns that are being echoed by US officials, the Pentagon, and Biden. Would love to get your thoughts on the likelihood of Iranian proxies getting involved, especially obviously the strongest one, Hezbollah.
Well, I'm real worried about it, and I'm worried about it from all sides of this, and that includes the American side. You've had, on my new show here, Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube, we had some guests on the other day where we were talking about the fact that there's too many Americans that want this war. They want to be, frankly, too cocky and say, hey, if Hezbollah does something, we're going to attack them. And if Ukraine, or if we find out that Iran was involved at all, we're going to go send missiles straight into there. You had Lindsey Graham saying, we'll take out their oil infrastructure. It's like these people have no idea the consequences of what that would mean. Because, we've been on the precipice of war many times. I mean, a couple of times during the Trump administration, we came real close on 2 separate occasions, and we were able to avoid it. But, there's this feeling or this concern that there could be, everyone's talking about it so much that there's this feeling of inevitability on all sides. And now then there's like, well, we better do something now because otherwise America is going to do it. Or the Americans think, you know what, it's time to just take these guys out. I'm tired of having to deal with this all the time. We might as well do it because it's going to happen anyway. And then people take action with no thought to what comes next. If you thought the Iraq war was a disaster, it's nothing compared to what would happen if we actually get into a war with Iran. I mean, just look at the Strait of Hormuz is the first thing you should do, because they could take that thing out and cause trouble for the entire region. Forget if they can't go toe-to-toe with the U.S. They can't. That's why they haven't done anything so far. That's why they didn't respond in any kind of strength after we killed Soleimani in a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, because they know that if they go too far, then we would cause them harm that they can't handle. But if we attack them, and now then they don't have any reason to restrain, there's a lot of things they could do, especially with some of their long-range missiles, which are getting more and more capable, and putting Israel at even greater threat, not to mention our troops pointlessly in Iraq and Syria. Don't get me started on that one either, but there's a lot of risk here, and there's so many different players, any one of whom does something stupid, it could cause a chain reaction that no one can control.
So it's just looking, based on your answer, before I go to the other hands, based on your answer, it seems that you're talking about a lot of people in the US want to get into a war with Iran. So how about the other side? Do you think Iran, so what is Iran's red line when it comes to the Israeli incursion into Gaza?
I think that Iran will not get into a fight if they can avoid it. They would be happy to have some of their proxies get involved with it. They'd like to have trouble around the edges, but I think that they will not. I don't think there's any red line that will cause them to get directly involved unless they are directly attacked.
Hoshyar, I'll go to you, then we'll go to Ronnie and Ahmed.
Thank you, Mario. I would like to just add that I agree with Daniel. That was a very good in-depth analysis of what is happening, especially on the point that there might be surprises. These guys might have weapons that nobody would expect. I remember in the 2006 war, Israel used to blockade essentially from the sea movements, and suddenly Hezbollah revealed they had weapons they could target frigates of Israel, and actually they did. Hassan Nasrallah was giving a speech and told the Lebanese, look out, frigate that's targeting our people is burning. Anyways, I think it is important to, looking at what's happening, to say there are some facts that are almost indisputable. One, Iran was serious from the get-go. Secondly, every major world leader, including the US, Europe, Middle Eastern countries, are saying that there is, that threat of escalation, and judging from experience, they are probably downplaying that. It's probably worse. The intelligence is pointing to something worse than that. The level of the threats, the numbers, and that's why I said I agree with Daniel. People don't really realize what's happening. It's really dangerous. And I think it was Robert Gates who pointed out that we've never had so many threats since the Second World War. President Biden has been made public. We mentioned there is that possibility even before it was made public, trying to restrain Israel because you could have a war with unforeseen consequences. And one point I would like to point out we have to remember that President Biden, Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, most of other senior administration members were in the Obama administration. And instead of opting for confrontation with Iran, they actually went for a nuclear deal. And it's been documented that back then, Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to attack Iran and probably bring the US in. And that actually rushed Obama into a deal with Iran. So these guys, and this is the point I want to make about what Hadi said about seeing less attacks today from Lebanon. This is my understanding from behind the scene diplomatic works, and as they say, diplomacy is there to prevent conflict. Once conflict breaks out, its function becomes restraining that. Exactly. No, trying to de-escalate at least. But at the same time, even when a war is going on, you have diplomats coming up with different solutions and scenarios to resolve that conflict. So I'm sure.
So, but you're saying, but Hashi, just to keeping it short, because I know Daniel's time is limited. But what you're saying on the de-escalation on the Lebanese front, are you saying this is potentially the beginning of long-term de-escalation?
It comes from Tehran, I think.
But is it from Tehran? Who's because on the Lebanese and Hezbollah side, they're blaming Israel for escalating, which I doubt because Israel doesn't want a two-front war. On the Israeli side, obviously they're blaming Hezbollah and they're saying they're responding to Hezbollah. From what I've seen, it just looks like Hezbollah is always hitting with the first strike, at least on most days. Heidi can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that this comes from Tehran. What kind of diplomatic deal would have happened in your opinion, Hoshi? And then we'll go to Hoshiar, and then we'll go to Daniel as well on that same question. What type of deal was done in the background? Would you have a special, I see Piotr as well requesting. Piotr, I'm going to bring you up right next. Would you have a special guest coming in as well? So Piotr, I'll bring you up shortly. But go ahead, Hoshi. I'd love your answer.
First of all, as I mentioned yesterday, Israel said we were going into Gaza. The Iranians said that would be a red line. Prime Minister, Defense Minister Gallant said, be ready, the political decision coming. You saw Hezbollah de-escalating. I didn't see that sort of statements from the Israeli side in the last 24 hours. I think through Qatar, through France, because Macron spoke with the Iranian president, through the Sultanate of Amman that has always functioned, bringing and getting answers for messages between the US and Iran. This is my own, let's say, analysis that the European leaders, the Americans, have basically told the Iranians, we are serious about moving troops, this, escalation that they made. If you don't stop, this could get out of hand. But if you stop, we can try to limit Israel's response. And that's why you see that. The reason I'm saying that, sorry.
Yeah, I'll let you wrap up on this point because I go to Daniel with that same question, and I'll go to Daniel now. Daniel, Hoshiar just gave a good overview on how these, why the de-escalations. We're seeing those de-escalations on the Lebanese-Israeli border, but then I'll link it to how is that possible? Like, are things really that dynamic? Because just yesterday, the US put out an alert to US citizens to leave Lebanon. We found out, but we got confirmation that 60 to 65% of Middle East Airlines flights were moved to Turkey and Cyprus for insurance purposes, which doesn't make sense because they can just pass on the insurance costs to their customers. That was the counter argument that was made. And the fear in Lebanon has been increasing. Tickets have been skyrocketing. That was just yesterday. It was happening live while we're doing the space. And now suddenly everything's de-escalating. Is the situation really that dynamic, or could that de-escalation just be preparation for the ground operation? No tit for tat, especially since Israel has reduced its strikes on Gaza.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of all of that because there's so much fear and so much unknown and so much trying to read the tea leaves and interpret what different people mean. I think that everybody, except for possibly Hamas, doesn't want a war. Nobody desires to have a conflict that they could be seriously harmed or destroyed in. But each side also has its own interests at stake, and they have to hedge their bets because, but what if the deterrence doesn't stick, or what if the de-escalation doesn't work? I have to be ready to defend my interest. And I keep hearing a lot of analogies to World War I, and I think they're the best because nobody wanted war then either. I mean, you had the Archduke assassination, and it should have just been a small situation with Serbia and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It should have never went anywhere else. But everybody kept thinking, well, if these guys help them, I got to be ready because then it could cause me a problem. And, things just went out of control. And war that no one wanted, everyone stumbled into. And there's many more players involved in this one. And there is so much, there's been so much building up over time here. And, that's the reason why I think that Hamas blew up here, is because for decades, these issues have been building. You had the whole summer to where 220 something Palestinian people were killed, mostly by the Israeli Defense Forces and the settlers, and no one seems to care anything about it. And they don't see any path to hope. And I think that leads people to take desperate measures. Well, if you thought they were desperate before, what hope does the Palestinian people have now? And of course, when other people in the region see them being treated this way, they got to wonder, might we be next? And especially when you're talking about other Arab states or Hezbollah, maybe they would be next. And so you have people, hedging all over the place. And that's why I say it's so volatile and chaotic that one bad mistake and one wrong move by one player could just start a chain reaction of events. And that's why I'm so adamant that the United States needs to stop talking about how we're going to go and bomb this country or that, or threaten this person or that. But we need to de-escalate and say, hey, militarily, the best thing Israel could do is say, we're going to take 3 months before we invade into the Gaza Strip. We're going to prepare. We're going to do stuff. Everything can calm down in that period of time. You'll have a better chance for military success. But then a lot of these, fears have a chance to be played down, and we can do diplomacy on all sides to keep this thing from blowing up. And then the underlying conditions are eventually going to have to be dealt with, or this will all come up again. But if Israel goes quick, then I think your chances for explosion go really high.
Before we go to the next question, Yehuda will go to you as well. But let me go to Noga. I want to ask you a question before we continue the discussion. In Kisufim, Zev and Noga, I've just received information from Vore Poste that there is clashes, fighting between Hamas and Israeli military near Kisufim. Artillery shelling can also be heard. Are you guys aware? Can you tell us more where Kisufim is?
Kisufim is in the north of it's north of the Gaza Strip.
Is it within the Gaza Strip, or is it in Israel? No.
I would like to reiterate once more that there are no Israeli villages in the Gaza Strip. It's north to the Gaza Strip. It's north of the Gaza Strip.
Yep.
Hamas has been shooting for the last couple of weeks nonstop, especially in the south. So I'm not surprised that they're hearing artillery, but I haven't heard of skirmishes there, which is why I'm checking that out. The last one I know of was yesterday.
But so is it common to have clashes on those borders with artillery shells? So when they say there's currently fighting between Hamas and Israeli military in Israel, in Kisufim, does that mean there's Hamas members in Kisufim?
No.
No. Absolutely.
No, actually, Mario, it's not in Kisufim. It's on the borders of Beirut.
Yeah, it makes more sense It makes a lot more sense for it to be a skirmish over the border skirmish, and that would also explain why you're hearing artillery. So it's like basically Hamas is shooting over the border and being shot back at.
Understood.
That has been happening quite often
Constantly.
the past couple of weeks.
Okay. Mario, can we dial back to just one thing your last speaker said? I think there was a big,
I know, but I did have a couple of things.
Yeah, we'll go. We'll go.
Analysis.
We'll go. Yeah.
We have Colonel Spencer here. I thought I heard a previous individual who did say that the best thing for Israel to do militarily would be to wait 3 months, as if there are no plans or there's no strategy here. I kind of shook my head there, and I think John Spencer did. Could we get John's reply to that, Mario? Because
John, go ahead. Go. Hold on, guys. No, I'll give you. So I'll give you the mic as well, I promise. So that's a good question. I was actually thinking about asking Daniel as well on that. So John, I'll let you get your thoughts on this, get Daniel's thoughts again. Ahmed, I know you're waiting, so I'll go to you next for the next question. But my thought process, Daniel, I'll let you clarify it a bit further, and then we'll go to John. My thought process when you said that is that wouldn't those 3 months give time? Because we had a US official today say a ceasefire with Hamas we shouldn't have a ceasefire because it will give them time to prepare. So the ceasefire, there was a small ceasefire today for the 2 hostages to be released, and then the airstrikes continued. So wouldn't a 3 month preparation time allow Hamas to prepare for this as well?
Well, see, you got to understand, Hamas has had months to prepare already. I mean, they've already done a lot of this preparation when they had the ability to actually get resources. Now, then, everything's shut down and cut off. So now that all they can do is use their resources, but the Israeli side will have no shortage of anything that they want. So, yes, they can try to make improvements in their positions with inside Hamas, or with inside Gaza. Of course they can slightly incrementally get better, but they don't have the resources anymore to do anything additional. And so the Israeli side does, and the longer you let them sit in there, especially with the food and water cut off, they're going to get weaker by the day, and I don't even know if they could survive that long. It's basically
they've got stockpiles.
Yeah,
they've and it's years in the making, not months. So that kind of negates your previous statement that the last summer saw them being dejected and all upset. It kind of sounds like victim blaming, but the reality is they've got supplies. They can fortify. They can dig in 3 months. It's a horrible idea. I don't know. Maybe John, he's someone from your world there. Sorry, Mario.
Yeah, Mario. Yeah, that's pretty crazy analysis in my opinion. Based on the one thing you need in war is will. And Israel is dependent on the will of the international community to allow the operation to go, on top of the tactical considerations of Hamas's ability to conduct the opposing defense to prevent Israel from achieving this goal. It isn't just about bullet to bullet, right, fighter to fighter, asymmetric to symmetric. This is a war to achieve a defined military objective. The longer Israel waits, there are advantages and disadvantages, but we saw, like the room that Daniel was in, it's about economics. Israel can't have half its population or at a status of war not producing GDP for 3 months. It just can't do it. If it had basically the will of the international community forever, it doesn't, and it can't do that. And I really disagree with blaming Israel for what happened based on his previous actions. There is no excuse for the massacre of October 7th, and I actually don't like hearing from it.
Daniel, I'll let you respond back before we go to Ahmed. If you've got any
Because and you did not hear me say anything that blaming Israel for what Hamas did. That is indefensible what they did. It is a slaughter. It violates every law of mankind, no matter what country or anything else, and they deserve to be punished 100%. No caveats to go along with that. Where I do say that Israel had some problems is that they did not solve this problem when they had the chance, before it exploded into this kind of violence, when they had an opportunity. That's what I said on there. So just to be clear on that point. But yeah, people can disagree on different strategies, but the benefit to Israel militarily to wait before the attack would be much better than the benefit that would accrue to Hamas. And aside from the issue of how many supplies they may have, but the bigger issue, which doesn't get much consideration at all, is that the Israeli military is not ready for this scale of an operation like this. They, in fact, they hardly did any training at all this summer because of all the chaos going on. The reservists literally refused to go to training. But they have done smaller scale things over the years, but they haven't done big scale thing like this. And they need to have time to train their troops. And I'm telling you, from someone who's done it, we had several months to prepare before we launched into a big tank battle in Desert Storm. We had months, and we were already pretty trained. And if you're not trained, you need that time to prepare and rehearse before you go in there.
So Ahmed, I'm going to go to you. I'll go to you afterwards, Noga, I promise. And by the way, I see some great speakers requesting, so we'll be bringing speakers up gradually throughout the space. Ahmed, before you ask your question to Daniel, maybe you can give us an update on the ground. So we do see the airstrikes kind of eased up today. We saw the 2 hostages being released, which we'll talk about a bit later. We also have some more information on Israel has notified the US this morning that the constant request for delays to the ground invasion into Gaza is beginning to, quote, wear thin, because we've talked a lot about how the US and other nations are requesting for a delay to allow hostages to be released. An Israeli politician, Aryeh Deri, said the ground operation was delayed because Israel never developed any plan to end Hamas. The Israeli defense minister, Gallant, he said, keep remaining prepared. He told the soldiers at a Navy base, keep remaining prepared for the offensive because it will come. We are preparing thoroughly. It will be a lethal attack. It will be a combined attack from land, sea, and air. So I want to get your update on the ground, Ahmed, and I know you're keeping close track of it. On the ground operation, what's happening in Gaza? I know some aid entered, not enough. Fuel is needed according to the UN, but Israel said there's not going to be any fuel entering Gaza until hostages are released. A quick update from you, Ahmed, would be good, and then I'll let you ask the question to Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Just before I give the brief update, I'm the only Palestinian here, and I appreciate if you bring some speakers up, like Ahmed Swahili and Firas. They were speakers, but they put down.
Yeah, they'll be coming up, and they'll be coming. I see Faraz requesting already. Told him he'll be coming up. This is more so we're discussing more from a military perspective. We haven't gotten into like Israel Palestine type discussion.
Okay, so
but by the way, just to make it funny, Ahmed, yesterday I was attacked for not having enough Israeli speakers. Now I'm being attacked for not having enough Palestinians. I'm trying, man. I promise you, I'm trying. I'm trying.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank you. So basically, during the day, it was quiet. It wasn't like relatively quiet, but when the night comes, it's just like the horrors become really visible. So just in the past 2 hours, there were literally a lot of bombardments, like in multiple areas in the Gaza Strip, in Khan Yunis, which had a lot, in Rafah, and even in the Shati camp, which is in Gaza City, which is where my family is. There were a lot of bombardments. There have been reports of massacres, as like tens have died and hundreds are wounded, and they're being transported to the hospitals. I can see the footage now live on Al Jazeera. So like when the night comes, like horrible things start to appear. So there's a lot, and I can just see continuous reports of people just like this one died from this family, this one died, like 4, 5, and 6 in the same family. So the reports from the Ministry of Health in Gaza, they were saying that 3 massacres in the last hour in Shati and Jabalia, which is in the north of Gaza, and Sheikh Radwan, which is in Gaza City. So the situation is just as yesterday. You remember how yesterday how intense it was, and how heavy the bombardments, and how many civilians have died, and it just seems to be that every night things are getting worse. So it's not going. I can see no de-escalation whatsoever. So I just wanted to ask Daniel, if that's okay, and appreciate you being here as an expert. I want to ask about the ground invasion. So in my point of view, this has been delayed for many causes. One of them is the lack of training for the soldiers. And this, like, the second point is the fear and intimidation, because these guys have had experiences before. They did experience it in 2008, in 2014, and like they were humiliated, they were crushed by Hamas. Like there were many several casualties by like on the Israeli side, and they did not achieve any goal. So they went out of that just having like false victory, like we have won or whatever. A third point is that the external pressures from the Americans and others. And the fourth, which is like the most important one in my point of view, it's the lack of goals. They don't have any goals. Like this really says like we're gonna crush Hamas, we're gonna like end Hamas, destroy Hamas in Gaza. That's not gonna happen. You've tried that before. It did not happen. And you will not be able to like eliminate Hamas from Gaza or from Palestine as like generally speaking, because Hamas is not just members. Hamas is a resistance, and resistance is an ideology. And as long as there is an occupation, they will always be resistant to the occupation. So I would just want your point of view, Daniel, on the like on the goals and the feasibility of achieving these goals that the Israelis say that we're going to for these goals. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that I think we don't get enough thought about, because you're talking about two separate goals. One is like a political desire and outcome, and the second one is what's militarily and tactically possible. And yes, you can send the military in there and say, all right, I want you to clear all the human beings out of this area. I want you to kill anyone who has a gun who's pointing at you. You can do that. You can't kill an idea. And, you know, as I referred to a second ago, a lot of the problems that with the Hamas took this rash action they did is because of the, you know, many years of frustration. And they apparently, I'm not going to speak for them because I haven't talked to any of them or even heard about them, but presumably they felt like they were in a no-win situation and they would rather die than continue to live in the way they were. So they were desperate to go in there. And that's not endemic or unique just to the Hamas people. It's also among many in the Palestine. So you can go in there and you can somehow physically kill all 30,000 of the presumed Hamas actual fighters or members of the organization, and it's not going to change anything because all of the conditions are still going to exist. In fact, they'll be much worse. Somebody's going to have to lead the people, and it's the people who are frustrated and want to be free, and they don't want to have to live in this so-called open air prison anymore. And somebody's going to have to deal with that. So you can't kill that idea. It has to be dealt with, and that's why I say that it could have been dealt with before this blew up. And and no one would have liked the outcome. No one's going to like this outcome. But if you think you're going to go in with military power and make Israel safe because of this, you're going to be sadly disappointed, I'm afraid.
Exactly.
John, I'd love.
Just to comment on that. Just to comment.
Ahmed. Go ahead. And I'll let John respond as well, and then I'll let you comment on both Daniel and John's response, Ahmed, and then we'll go to Noga.
Yeah, there's a lot of one thing I agree with Daniel. It's really hard to kill an idea.
Just quick, sorry, John, without being rude, just your audio's not great. I know you're probably on the move. Not sure if you can fix it. All right, so John, while you're fixing your mic, Ahmed, I'll let you respond to Daniel, and then John, just jump in when your mic is fixed. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Yeah, it's just a comment that I wanted to add is that, as I stated, like Hamas or the resistant factions in Gaza and all of Palestine, it's an ideology, and the ideology is gonna remain there as long as occupation remains. So as long as the Israelis keep arresting people and putting them into administrative detention with no trials, as long as they keep killing Palestinians in the West Bank and just around Gaza, as long as these atrocities are being committed every day in a daily Palestinian life, as long as Palestinians are being treated as like fifth-class citizens in the land, the resistance is just going to remain because it's not going to fade away. The only option is just to sit and have a solution, have a one-for-all solution, just to satisfy everyone.
The problem, but Ahmed, on that point, actually, a curious question, and then we'll go to John. On that particular point, is that the circumstances to sit and have a discussion, it was arguable before October 7th, but now it's impossible. And I don't know if it'll ever be possible. October 7th kind of made it impossible, in my opinion. Now, there's always a counter argument. It's a good debate. There's always a counter argument that what led to it and playing the blame game. But it happened. Whoever you want to blame, it happened. Whatever caused it, October 7th happened. And I just cannot fathom a world where Israel will ever talk to Hamas again. And that's my concern. We'll get your thoughts, Ahmed, and then we'll go to, I think Spencer dropped out.
Yeah, well, I can say the same thing. I can say the same thing about the Israelis. How do you expect the Palestinians to sit down and have a talk with you when you have committed all of these massacres for 75 years?
Can I jump in, Ahmed? From 2005 to 2007,
Mario,
what blockade was there against Gaza? Zero, because it wasn't bombing them.
Sorry, can you repeat the point? Sorry, I did not hear that.
From 2005, when Israel left the Gaza Strip, which it does not occupy, from 2005 to 2007, when Fatah and the Palestinian Authority managed it and ran it, how many blockades did they have? Zero. How many ports did they have? One seaport. How many international airports did they have? One international airport. It seems like you're rewriting history. There was no blockade against Gaza when you had normal people running it. Then a terror group took over, and Israel blockaded it because they didn't want to die. Now, everything you said doesn't make sense.
Are you saying that there was no siege for 16 years? Are you saying that there was no siege?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. I am.
Then you're very oblivious. That's my point.
Mario.
You're just oblivious.
Go ahead, Spencer.
Mario.
So John, John, you're back. It's working now. It's perfect, Mike.
Okay,
go ahead, sir, and then I'll go to the next question.
I mean, history just doesn't show that Daniel's assessment of not being able to destroy Hamas military capability. The stated objective of IDF, yes, there are political statements that are saying destroy Hamas as an ideal, but to destroy Hamas military capability, thousands of rockets, a tunnel network, infiltration tunnels, to take that military capability away from a target is historically validated against ISIS and many other individuals. You can't kill. ISIS still exists today. Al-Qaeda still exists today. They all still exist. But to give them sanctuary where they can build by third party military capability is what Israel says they will no longer do. I agree with Daniel that this could have been solved before now. But right now, and again, this is another conversation where nobody has an alternative to October 7th or preventing Hamas from being able to do this again tomorrow or the next day or for the next 20 years. Yes, there has to be a long-term solution for Gaza. Gaza is not West Bank. It is not the Palestinian Authority. We've talked about that, but militarily, from an analyst of like operations, it is 100% possible with the IDF right now, tomorrow, to achieve that military mission and to say that they successfully achieved it tomorrow.
Please
Just
explain
quickly,
how.
guys.
Mario, could I please?
Yeah. Hold on. Noga, I know you're trying to jump in. I will give you the mic. Alex has, for example, been waiting as well, hasn't jumped in. So I'll give you the mic. Just came in right now. The Indonesian hospital in Gaza just lost power, and its vital facilities were disrupted due to running out of fuel. We were just discussing fuel shortages, and Israel saying there will be no fuel into Gaza. So that kind of brings me to my next question. Like,
But hang on, before you get to the next question, I wanted to relate to the military and the ideological question, and I'd like to be able to reply to that before you move on to the next subject.
Go ahead, Noga, briefly, please.
Okay, couple things. First of all, you can fight ideology. You can also eradicate abilities. And you guys keep giving the example of ISIS, but honestly, let's go back to where it's relevant, which is Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was eradicated, and then it was rebuilt, and more importantly, it was re-educated. And no one in their right mind would now assume that Germany and France are going to go to war right now, but they did do that twice within the span of 20 years. So an ideology, as evil as the Nazis and as evil as Hamas, can be eradicated, it needs to be addressed, which is something, it's the big elephant in the room that everybody's ignoring. But no, this time around, after we eradicate Hamas, and it can be eradicated, we will also be eradicated its ideology. Hamas and the entire population are going to go through intense denazification. We're not leaving it a chance again. And yes, as someone already, hang on,
No, guys, we've moved off from the discussion. No, I knew that was going to happen. That's why I didn't want to get into that debate.
I want to go back to the military. That was the ideology. Now I want to go back to the military aspects. A couple of things. First of all, I don't know how many of you read Hebrew, but this was in the paper, so it's not like you could have missed it or I'm telling you any secrets. There was a huge exercise at the end of May that lasted, I think it was 3 weeks. It had tens of thousands of soldiers, and believe it or not, they were exercising multi-front attacks. So anyone who argues that the Israeli military isn't prepared for this has not been following the news. Okay, and yes, there have been certain people who said they're not going to go exercise. Those were mostly veterans blowing off steam. Assuming that it in any way, shape, or form hampered Israeli preparedness would be not, again, following the news. This is not news. You guys can look it up. It's in Hebrew news all over. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we're not in a hurry to get in. And the IDF spokesperson explained that the few soldiers that we didn't catch in, I swear to God, it was like May and June, not at all a long time ago, we're getting to them now. And again, this is IDF explanations about why it is that we're not going in right now from like 2 days ago. You guys could have seen it as well.
I do. So my next question is going back to Hezbollah, and I've given a lot of updates on this, and I want to go to Alex, and I see Piotr also your hand up. Go to Alex, and then go to Piotr. Is the likelihood of Israel preemptively striking Hezbollah? I know that was discussed already within Israel. I know there's some voices calling for preemptive strike. Let me go through the updates today, whether there's anything on that in that regard here. There's a lot of concern around Iran. There's a lot of concern around Hezbollah entering. I will play a clip as well. I'm going to play this clip before asking you that question, Alex, and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, talking about the concerns of Iran. Let me play that now.
Lloyd Austin. Secretary Austin, thank you for being here. I want to start with those moves you announced late yesterday, last night. You've got the USS Eisenhower going to the Persian Gulf. You've got more missile defense systems headed to the region. Troops put on standby. What's behind these moves?
Well, Jonathan, as you know, recently we've seen rocket and UAV attacks against bases housing our troops in Iraq and Syria. We're concerned about potential escalation. In fact, what we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region. And because of that, we're going to do what's necessary to make sure that our troops are in the right, good position, they're protected, and that we have the ability to respond. Now, this additional deployment sends another message to those who would seek to widen this conflict. As President Biden said earlier, and as you've heard me say, if any group or any country is looking to widen this conflict and take advantage of this very unfortunate situation that we see, our advice is don't. We maintain the right to defend ourselves, and we won't hesitate to take the appropriate action.
So this is by Secretary of Defense, and he did talk about, quote, the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region. This is a concern of his throughout the interview. I didn't want to play too long of a clip. Alex, you've been with us. We've covered the attacks on US bases in Iraq and Syria. We've talked about Hezbollah significantly. There's, on that front, at least, things have de-escalated. In Gaza, things have escalated again as we're doing the space. I want to get your thoughts on the state of things today and what you've heard so far.
Sure. So General Austin was my boss at the end of the Iraq War when he came back to take over U.S. forces in Iraq. I was running the special program shop in 2010 into 2011. He is a very soft-spoken man. He is an introvert, and when he speaks, he uses few words, but when he speaks, it matters, right? So he was very clear with what he said, and it's exactly what I said, when we were on the other day when these started to happen. It's very clear that these were coordinated, these were directed in terms of happening within hours of each other with the attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, in Syria, including BBC, the Victory Base Camp, which is the U.S. headquarters. We saw the strategic and ballistic missile launches from the Houthis in Yemen that had to be taken down by a U.S. ship that was in the region there. Iran is very clearly messaging, and they are trying to tell the United States that they need to try to turn this grounded curtain off and stop an escalation inside of Gaza, because or else they can reach out and touch us whenever they want. That message has been blatantly clear. It's been delivered in public and private, and then that is the physical manifestation of that deterrence message, basically saying, stop doing that. So that's what the Iranians are doing. We're seeing an uptick. They must have intelligence. I'm not in government anymore, so this is just based on protocol and how things work. There must be some sort of intelligence saying that they see a threat picture increasing, or else they wouldn't be deploying the forces. And also because there's an uptick in attacks, that also will kind of play into the factoring there that, hey, if they're already increasing with or without intelligence, we might as well bolster, because the original deployment is not enough to deter them at this point, because they're still hitting U.S. bases. So that's really what we're talking about there in terms of regional escalations. There's a couple of things that have been said that kind of need to be addressed. So there was one fair point, and that's in terms of readiness. There's obviously been a problem with helmets and body armor. We don't know if the reservists, there hasn't been enough of that stuff around. That's been all over the news. But there's a couple of things that everybody's forgotten here. Israel has called for the temporary displacement of Palestinians south of a certain line in Gaza, because they intend to go into Gaza City, and they intend to go into the tunnels, the buildings, and go find all the strategic weapons and everything else. You can't leave 2.1 million people out in the streets for an extended period of time south of that line and expect to conduct operations, especially with the humanitarian situation that's going on right now. You cannot leave troops sitting inside vehicles with adrenaline and everything else, then shut them down, send them back home, back to work, back to war. It doesn't work. It's not practical. That's not how this is going to go. Okay, that's problematic for a whole host of reasons. And there was a very clearly stated military objective. We'll talk about whether or not it's achievable in a second. But Prime Minister Netanyahu hit the microphone right at the beginning and said, hey, we are going to demilitarize Hamas, was the word that was used. And it's the same phrase I've been using for the last 2 weeks. You cannot kill an ideology with bombs and bullets, which has been hit several times tonight. The problem is not going to be necessarily with the military operation. There's overwhelming force. They can go in and do it. If they're prepared with the bodies, the blood, and the treasure to go in and actually go fight and go into the tunnels and go clear the cities and everything else, they can go do that. But what happens afterwards, right? Who is going to take control, as was mentioned, inside of Gaza? Who's going to ensure that there's not a resupply of rockets? The place has been locked down for a long time. They've been bombing for 2 weeks, and there's still rockets flying all over the place, right? So there's clearly massive stockpiles, and there's been means of getting stuff inside of there. And even if you're inside of Gaza, right, and there was the talk of re-education or whatever it was, there's the West Bank, there's the entire region. Everybody is supportive in the region of a Palestinian state. There's not a single Arab state that's come out and said, hey, there shouldn't be one. And there's been pretty much unified calls from the Arab world for a return to the 67 borders, which are militarily indefensible because they're about 9 miles wide at their thinnest point, right? But there's been a universal, call for that. So the idea that that's somehow going to go away is not going to happen, and that that's not going to lead to violence again if that's kind of repressed. And that'll be up to the people on the ground to determine how they want to try to achieve that end state, right? Either through political negotiations or violence to try to get, what they're looking for, which is independence and a Palestinian statehood. So all of that being said, we still don't know who's going to rule over Gaza afterwards. We have no idea, other than the fact that the Israeli ambassador to the United States and the one to the UN said clearly, we don't intend to, quote, that was their words, occupy or reoccupy, and we have no desire to rule over the 2.1 million people who live in Gaza. again, Mahmoud Abbas has said that he's not going to go back into Gaza on the back of an Israeli tank, and for Fatah and the PLO. And again, I don't see Israel handing control back over to Hamas inside of Gaza if they have an ability to do so. So that's where the comments were made by General Petraeus saying, "Hey, we need to have a clearly defined end state for what this looks like," because we made the same mistake in Iraq, was the words that were kind of used there. Like going in, there wasn't a good post-transition afterwards because we had an idea.
And Arya Deri said the same thing. He said, "Quote, the ground operation was delayed because Israel never developed any plan to end Hamas." So maybe the pressure from the West may be playing a small role, but there's more to it than that. Not having a plan could end up leading to a worse situation for Israel.
There's a reason they don't have a plan to end Hamas, Mario. It's because they've been propped up by the Netanyahu government for years. And that's why they don't even have a plan.
But I think the propping, I think those days, the prop up.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I know some of this propaganda is coming from the Israeli side, but honestly,
so the question, Firas, was it? Quick question, Firas. I know the quote. Just quick question here. Did they announce that they're propping it up, or did they announce that there's strategically Hamas makes sense because keeps they weaken each other, Hamas and the West Bank
strategically.
Netanyahu,
ideology is opposed to a two-state solution.
The reason
he props up Hamas is because.
But I wouldn't say, but first, I wouldn't just cross. I'm not saying they're not propping it up. I wouldn't cross the line of saying propping it up if it strategically makes sense. I'm not sure if anyone disagrees on that point, but
it's propping it up because strategically it makes sense if your aim is to avoid or basically kill the chance of a two-state solution. So this is not my analysis. This is not.
But what you're saying. But let's say the strategy. But let's say moving away from that, whether that's true. But first, moving.
Israeli politics, by the way.
First, first, before I go to Piotr and Ronnie, moving away from this, do you think with the operation that we're seeing right now, could that kill Hamas the same way the West has killed